welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Edwin Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about how many properties do you need to live a decent lifestyle in retirement. Now, stick around for the next 15 minutes because you're going to learn how to figure out the exact number of properties you are going to need. You're also going to learn about the two different stages of wealth building that you're going to need to go through, and also what properties you specifically buy and when. Now, this is one of the most common questions we get in investment from different investors. They want to know, well, how many properties do I actually need so that I can just live off the rent and not have to turn up and go to work anymore? And so we wanted to do a bit of a digging to figure out the actual answer to this question. But Andrew, before we get into it, what's your kind of gut reaction? How many properties does somebody need to live a good retirement?
So the number that I was told when I started investing 20 odd years ago was that you needed 10 rental properties to retire comfortably. And so that was the number that I always had in my head when I was 19, going out, starting investing. I need 10 investment properties. Now, the actual number today probably isn't anywhere near that. And it's actually quite hard to get to 10 properties nowadays because lending criteria is so much harder. Property prices are more expensive. So what you've got to actually work out is what are you wanting to achieve in terms of income or wealth? And then what strategy are you going to use to get there? Now, there are two strategies that we talk about in our book and on the show, the nest egg and the golden goose. So the nest egg works like this. You're 40 today, you want to retire at 65, so you need to build up your money. And then when you get to 65, you're going to spend that money until you die. Now, the problem with that model is you've got to guess when you're going to die. So if you get that wrong, you're either going to work too long or you're going to live too long and run out of money. So neither of those are good. The other option is the golden goose, where you might have, rather than have 2 rental properties, you might have 4. And then you're going to sell 2, pay off the other 2, and then live on the rental income with no debt anymore. It's a bit more complicated than that, and we'll go into that, but basic.
Yeah, the most important thing to understand there with the golden goose is that's kind of the gold standard if we think about stopping work, because then we've got some properties and we just live off the rent. Now, the big question is, how many do we need? And what's really interesting is Massey University's retirement expenditure guidelines kind of give us a bit of a sense. So they say that for 2 people living in one of our main cities, so Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, New Plymouth, let's call that a main city too, Invercargill, maybe not Invercargill, maybe Dunedin, one of the metro centres. You know what that is. For 2 people to live there with what they call a choices lifestyle, you need about 86 grand per year, right? Now, the good news is that some of that money is going to come from the New Zealand government if you are close enough that you think, yeah, I'm going to get NZ Super. And so if you're getting New Zealand superannuation and you're like, okay, I want to get topped up to that 86.6K a year I need, then you're going to need about an extra $54,000 a year before tax coming from property, right? So that's 2 people, which means that effectively you and your partner, including super, are bringing home $51,000 a year each. So total household income of 102 grand. And after you pay your tax, that's how you get to that kind of 86 grand. Now, the big question that you then have then is, well, how many properties do I need in order to be able to generate $54,000 a year just that I can take home after I pay for my rates, maintenance, insurance? But it's important to recognize, in order to be able to generate like $50,000 a year in rental income, we basically need to get rid of our mortgages.
Yeah, and there are 2 ways that you can do that. You can either pay off your mortgages, which is a very slow way of getting debt-free, and also requires significant income to be able to do that. The other way is by selling assets. And now you might think, okay, well, today I might buy, again, 4 investment properties. Let's say every property doubles in value in 15 years. That's not the case, but let's say it does. You can sell 2 of those properties in 15 years, take the profits and pay off the other 2 rental properties, giving you 2 freeholdings. That's a more common way of doing it. Again, people might change the type of property they have when they get to retirement, going from a growth property to a yield property. But just for simplicity here, if you buy 4 properties, sell 2 in 15 years, you can pay off the other 2.
Well, that's actually a really important point we go through in our book as well, that generally people in their first stage of building wealth, you've got to build your wealth, so wealth accumulation, and then we typically have that second stage that we talked about, which is wealth decumulation, which is either when you spend that money or you transition your assets into, in this case, yield property. So that's similar to what Martin Hawes, who's New Zealand's most trusted financial advisor, came onto our podcast and talked about not that long ago. And so one of the big things that people will often do when you get to the stage where you're saying, how do I make 54 grand profit per year just from rental income, that's when you often start to look for yield properties. So we're talking about dual key apartments, dual key townhouses, student accommodation, boarding houses, all of those kinds of things. Now, in order to generate 54 grand worth of profit, we usually work on what's called a 4% net yield, which means that after paying for your rates, your insurance, your maintenance, you're able to get 54 grand. Now, in order to be able to do that, you'd need about $1.36 million worth of property fully paid off, no mortgage, in order to be able to generate that income. So that's basically two $675,000 properties fully paid off just to live off the rent. And so this kind of simple answer to how many properties do I need to live an okay retirement is two fully paid off properties, 675K, earning a 4% net yield. That's kind of the simple answer. But that answer is quite different for everyone.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll give you an example of some investors that I just worked with last week. These guys have been in business for a while. They've subsequently stepped away from the business. It still generates quite a significant income, and they want to use some of that income to invest in the next few years. He's 46 from memory. She's a bit younger, maybe 42. They want to invest pretty aggressively in property over the next few years so that they know if something happens to that business income because they sell the business and then they get a lump of cash, or maybe the business just doesn't continue to go on as strong as it has in the past, what would they need to do to generate enough income from just property alone to live a decent lifestyle? Now, their numbers, they want to spend $150,000 a year. And so to do that, if we factor in the tax side of things, you've got to earn basically $193,000 after your operating costs of owning the rental properties. And so that's taking out things like rates and insurance and assuming that there's no debt on those properties. Now, $193,000 in rent after costs is about $5 million worth of property. So 6 properties worth $800K each, fully paid off.
So 6 properties for them. And the interesting thing is that the number of properties that you specifically need is going to be different. So if you're investing in more affordable properties, like $500,000 properties, well, you're going to need more properties to give you that rental income compared to if you're investing in more expensive properties, which then give that higher rental amount, not necessarily as a percentage, but total amount. Like if you've got a $500,000 property, it might rent for $500 a week. If you've got the right type of $1 million property, it might rent for $1,000 a week. So if you're investing in those $1 million properties, you don't need as many compared to if you're investing in $500,000 properties. So the exact number of properties depends on the sort of properties you're buying. What else does it depend on?
So I think the first thing is whether or not you're buying growth or yield properties. So again, when you're running the race and you're wanting to build up your wealth, you're very likely to focus on growth properties. When you really want to earn a good income, or if you want to minimize the number of properties that you're going to have to own in retirement, then that's when you probably transition to the yield properties. And if you buy higher yielding properties, you need fewer of them.
But the other thing there is it's really interesting how small changes in the yield really impact the number of assets that you need to buy. So let's say that you want to earn $100,000 before tax. Now, if you earn a 4% net yield, your return's 4%, then you need $2.5 million worth of assets. If your net yield is 5%, so you buy properties that are even higher yielding, you then only need $2 million worth of assets. So you could retire with like one property less effectively, or $500,000 less. You don't need to build up as much wealth. And so the yield really does have a big impact on how many assets you need, how many houses you need, how much income you can get at that stage. But it also really depends on how much you want to spend.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to earn $150,000 a year after tax, like those investors, then you're going to need more properties compared to someone that wants to earn the $87,000 a year, that choices lifestyle. Or maybe you're living on the West Coast and your bills are minimal. And in fact,
you're talking about the West Coast of New Zealand, not the West Coast of the States.
Yes, correct. I was talking to some investors from the West Coast just the other day, and they were like, you know what, we can live quite comfortably on $48,000 a year. Now, if that's the case, you need fewer properties so they can retire sooner or own less properties. And I think the other big thing that I would consider as well is how old you are. So if you're younger, on the younger side, i.e., mine and Ed's age, you probably wouldn't want to factor in having the government superannuation in the future. I don't think that's a wise financial plan. If you're close to retirement, and a few years out, there's an investor I'm working with at the moment who's 62. There's very unlikely there will be a change to the government superannuation and how it's paid in the next few years. So he can rely on that government super, knowing that it's highly improbable that that's going to change. I can rely on that.
I think 15 years out is a pretty
15
safe
years,
assumption.
that's your number?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if you think about when National tried to change the superannuation, there was like no change if you were like, I think it was like 18 years out from super. It wasn't going to impact you. And then it was going to be very gradual anyway. And I realized that there's a lot of number crunching in this. We're talking, before tax, after tax, net yield. What is the net yield? How does it all work together? The most important thing is that all of the stuff is kind of complex, but you do need to think about it. There was a really interesting story just the other day. Somebody was emailing me about their spreadsheet. They were trying to run numbers on a spreadsheet, and why aren't their numbers quite kind of matching up with mine?
Really? And you read this? This is one of Ed's pet peeves.
No, well, I don't mind at all. If people are running their own numbers, I think that's really positive. But I think the main thing you just need to keep in mind when you are running your numbers is also, if this is the first time you've ever created an Excel model trying to plan for retirement, you need some help as well. You need some other eyes to look at it, because often there are very basic but very important assumptions that people miss when they are running their own numbers. So I do encourage you don't have to use Opus Partners as your financial advisors, but use somebody who has some skills at running models and checking numbers, because you don't want to mess up your investments when it comes for retirement, right? You don't want to get to retirement and realize that you don't have as much money as you really need to live the lifestyle you want. Just bring it back to the exact number of properties that you need fully paid off in order to live that retirement you want. I suppose the number is typically somewhere between 2 to 6. So if we think about the kind of typical choices lifestyle that we talk about, that most people aspire to, or at least aspire to, generally speaking, if you've got the NZ Super and you've got 2 properties fully paid off, earning you that 4% net yield, you can live that choices lifestyle in the metro areas. You spend 86.6K per year, which is about $1,600. I think it's $1,660 a week, and be quite comfortable. If you've got more ambitious spending goals, you want to spend that 150K a year, and on top of that, you want to not rely on the New Zealand superannuation. You want to count that as a bonus, like in Andrew's example. You're probably talking about 6 properties in total. Now, the good thing about this is if we think about what Andrew said right at the start, which was when you grew up, grew up. You're still growing up now. But, when you were starting out in property investment, 10 properties, that's what you need to be rich. Well, actually, you can live a really comfortable lifestyle if you've got 6 fully paid off. The big question is, how do you get the money to have 6 investment properties fully paid off?
So I think the hard thing, and actually I was talking about this the other day to someone, the hard thing for people when they start investing is they get a number in their head like 6, and then they think, okay, I need to go and see whether or not I can get the borrowing for 6 properties now, and then I need to figure this all out because I need to know exactly how I'm going to make this work. And then they go to the bank, and the bank might say, hey, look, the maximum we'd give you is 2, maybe 3 properties. And they think, oh, I can't get to my 6. What the hell's the point? I think you don't want to get in your own head. You actually just want to start making progress towards that goal. You need to know the direction you're going, but you don't have to have all the answers today. And you only buy property number 6 by starting out with property number 1. So you need to know what your goal is and what you're going to need to achieve it, and then you need to start working towards that over time.
Well, the other big thing is that as you buy properties, they're potentially going to increase in value, hopefully going to grow your wealth, at least over the medium term, and rents tend to increase over time. On top of that, your income tends to increase over time. So buying properties, those will eventually help you to buy even more properties. Now, that can lead people to the wrong conclusion sometimes. I remember I was talking to one investor who purchased their first property. I think they renovated it and they were all done. They rented it out. And then they went to the bank to go get their next one. And the bank said no at that time. And I said, but hang on, I've just bought my first property. I thought once you buy one, it gets easier. It gets easier over time, but it can also take a couple of years. Property investment tends to be a bit of a slow burn. And what I mean by that is it takes, 5 years. It takes 10 years to build up a portfolio. If I think about when we started this podcast, I didn't have many properties at all and have slowly built it up over the last 5 years. I wouldn't think I'd have today what I have. But you often don't see that when you're going forward. You've just got to start. And then as you spot opportunities, as the test rates change, as the banks loosen their criteria, that's when you're able to take your opportunities. So as a really rough ballpark, kind of 2 to 6 properties fully paid off, that's probably going to be enough for most people. And if you want to run your numbers, you really do want to talk to a financial advisor. If you want a free wealth plan, you can always talk to us here at Opus Partners, but there are a lot of other good financial advisors too. If you want to take us up on our offer, you can just go to opuspartners.co.nz. I'll drop the link down in the description in the show notes so you're able to get it. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hyde.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.